Hey y'all, Kelly Moody here. Welcome to the Ground Shots podcast, a podcast that explores our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling. It's been a little bit since I put a new episode out, a couple months actually, and I've been on the road a whole lot this spring, going to ancestral skills gatherings and teaching in person about plants and wild tending and exploring my work around critical ethnobotany and the ways that colonization and the modern world affect our understanding of land. So it's been a little bit of an interesting experiment for me this season because it's been a couple years since I've really taught in person, and I realized that it's a pretty sweet space to inhabit, and I've been enjoying that, and I've been enjoying kind of collaborating with other people too in that teaching lately as well. I'm on the road right now in Eastern Oregon. It's been a wet spring out west, which is really nice because that means that the fires will be hopefully less crazy. So it's early June and it's still kind of rainy. I'm in Eastern Oregon right now, headed up to Eastern Washington. So I stopped here to camp for a second and try to finish this podcast episode so I can get it out to the world soon. It's just been hard to make the time to finish editing it and all of the in-person demands that I'm experiencing right now, but it's really sweet to be recording this as I'm looking out into a beautiful view of sagebrush and juniper trees, and the smell in the air is really nice, and it's actually a little humid, which I'm not used to out here, especially in the deserty regions of Oregon and California. So this episode of the podcast is with Adam Larue, who I don't feel like I had officially met before this past month, but we had been in the same places at the same time. Adam is one of the owners of this piece of land in Grants Pass, Oregon, where the Sharpening Stone Earthskills Gathering occurs, and I went to teach at that gathering. I actually had no clue what to expect from the land, but I just decided to ask if I could teach wild tending and do my whole philosophy talk on ethnobotany at the gathering, and he was like, sure, come on, I would love that, and I would love to walk around and look at plants with you. So I came and was really delighted at how beautiful the land was and how much was going on plant-wise, and there was so much to talk about in all the classes at this gathering that Adam helps run on this piece of land that I felt like could have been like a multi-day class because there was just so many zones on the land that had so much points of conversation to get into. When I teach my plant walks, it's not just like, here's this plant and what it's good for. It's so much more to that, and I think Adam really appreciated bringing that perspective into the gathering, and also like that's a lot of what he's been thinking about too lately. So yeah, it was really sweet to spend that time there and connect with folks about plants from this perspective of like, how can we relook at the ways that we see land and the lenses that are influencing us to see land in a certain way, and how can we be actually reciprocal, or maybe that's just a conversation we need to be continuing to have, you know, and asking a lot of questions and not necessarily knowing if we have the answers. But so this conversation with Adam happened after the gathering. I hung out for a few days, gathering a few plants, walking around the land, showing other people plants on the land. Sylvia, who's someone that lives there sometimes, and a couple other people who stuck around wanted to look more at some of the plants on the land and just to rest a little bit. And so we went up to this Camas meadow that's on the property where we took classes a lot during the gathering, because there was just so much to talk about and see in this meadow. There was also yampa and fawn lilies, death camas in this meadow, and so there's just so much to say, you know, just in that one place, much less like all these other amazing spaces on the land. So we walked up there and recorded this conversation after the gathering was done. And so for me, having just taught these classes was ripe on my mind, and also Adam having just been a part of facilitating the Sharpening Stone Gathering was ripe on his mind. And so we had a pretty good, sweet little conversation that I'm excited to share with y'all here. A little bit of what we talk about in this episode is how Adam got the land Sharpening Stone is on and where it takes place. He got it at a pretty young age and through kind of a crazy set of circumstances, so we talk about that a little bit. We talk about some of the methods and madness of logging in Oregon, which happens all around Adam's private inholding, kind of near the Umpqua National Forest, and all the herbicide spraying, the GMO tree planting, replacing forest diversity, kind of happening in that region. So it's a really informative episode on some of what it actually looks like on the ground to be living in the midst of this kind of madness of forest management in Oregon. The downfalls of profit-centered thinking versus ecological-centered thinking. Of course, that was such a big part of the conversations of my plant walks and ecology talks as well. Some info about the Sharpening Stone Skills Gathering and more kind of what that's all about. We talk about rewilding as a hot topic and a trend right now. We talk about dancing with modern technology while trying to reconnect to land, and of course with the podcast, that's always a conversation that I'm thinking about having, and yeah, what it means to be using things like this microphone I'm talking into right now to communicate ideas around land connection. We talk a bit about Adam's new YouTube project called Becoming Wild and how he is weaving education around eating and using wild foods in life and the conversations that come about around ways to tend them for more abundance. And that's definitely a big focus of his project, is the wild tending aspect of eating from the land. So there's a lot more we talk about in this episode, and you'll also hear a little bit of Adam's dogs coming in and hanging out with us here and there. I edited a little bit of that out, but I left some of it too because I was like, I'm gonna let these dogs have a little bit of highlight in the episode, because you remember they were sitting on the ground in a field of camas, and the dogs are coming around laying with us and wanting attention and hitting the mic sometimes, so we do the best we can to keep them occupied. But it's a funny guest entrance sometimes. To support this podcast, the best way is to either subscribe on Patreon, patreon.com/ofsedgeandsalt. Monthly support, financial support for the podcast is what keeps this project going. I don't make any money off of this. I don't have any grant funding or private secret funding happening. The Patreon is a big way that I can receive support for the podcast. You can also donate through PayPal or Cash App or Venmo directly, and all of the links to those handles are in every episode's show notes for the podcast. And yeah, and definitely any financial contribution and support is super helpful for keeping this project going. And thanks to all the folks that have been doing one-time donations or regular donations through PayPal and whatnot. And also on Patreon, I've had some folks subscribed on Patreon since the very beginning of all of my ground shots doings. So I really appreciate y'all's support. It's really what's kept the overhead for this paid for, and it doesn't really pay me too much yet, but like, it keeps the project alive and existing. And I know that so many people are touched by this. I've been hearing more and more in person as I go teach, and people are like, oh, I love your podcast and it's been helpful for me in this way or that, or the plant profiles that I've written and published for free on my blog. People, just last week I was at the Spirit Weavers Gathering teaching, and someone came up and was like, oh, I've been using your plant profiles to do research, and it's one of the best resources I've found. It's encouraging for me to hear that, because sometimes I feel like I put things out into the ethers and I don't know always what people are feeling and receiving, and so any feedback I get, I really appreciate, and any financial support people can throw my way for this project is also really appreciated. You could also leave a review on iTunes for the podcast. I really love seeing those and reading those. And the more written reviews I get and ratings I get, the more the podcast gets seen in the algorithms of searching on iTunes. So if you can take a second and go over there and write an honest review, I would really appreciate that. And I'm going to link in the show notes for this episode as well, links to Adam's stuff, his YouTube channel and Instagram handles for the Sharpening Stone Gathering and his Becoming Wild project. So you can go watch his couple videos he has out. They're really cool and fun, and I'm excited to see how much, how it evolves and how much more he puts out over time. It's really inspiring me to maybe try to dabble in doing some video stuff. It's been on my mind for a few years now to do that. Figure out how to creatively communicate about the beauty and connection with plants and the land and the world and tending and the medicine of ecology and land and all the questions and feelings and thoughts and and things that come up, and how could that be done through video potentially. I definitely have had moments where I'm focusing more on trying to figure out how to do that. When we did the Colorado Trail project, I have some video from that I still haven't dealt with, and I have video from different moments in time in different parts of the West that I haven't dealt with, but it's coming. If anyone out there has any advice they could give me on like the best programs to use, or what you think would be a best simplest course of action for that, let me know. I have some equipment, but watching Adam's videos and hearing how excited he is creatively about doing these has inspired me to consider something like that at some point. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and transition this into the interview in the Camas Meadow with Adam Larue. So I really appreciate y'all tuning in and continuing to listen to the Ground Shots podcast, and I really hope you enjoy this combo with Adam. Happy listening, y'all. Well, here we are in a Camas Meadow above your property.
Yeah.
After the Sharpening Stone Gathering. A beautiful, it's almost summer, but it feels very much like spring up here still. Higher elevation. So we're enjoying some sweater weather, which I'm excited about given that it's about to be super hot.
Yeah.
So we can start by, you can introduce yourself and give a little bit of context for where we are for the podcast listeners, and and tell me a little bit about what you do. We can mention the Sharpening Stone Gathering, which is why I'm here, and we can go from there.
Cool. Yeah, so my name's Adam Larue, and I got a little piece of heaven out here in southern Oregon. Little land I am blessed to caretake, and we're up here in a little piece of BLM that's connected to my property. It backs up against the property that I caretake, and I caretake a lot of this property, but land ownership is so funny that way. Like, I don't want to say I own the land, but I have a deed to some property, so I'm able to work with it, and this is my favorite time of year to be up in this meadow, because it looks like a big meadow of grass if you don't know what you're looking at for a lot of the year, and then all of a sudden, in beginning of May to like late May, it just blossoms, and there's just wildflowers everywhere, and a bunch of blue camas and buttercups and some death camas, and
a little bit death camas flowering,
and here and there, and but yeah, I love this space, and when I first got this place, I actually went on a walk up here, and it was part of what sold this property to me. I mean,
you knew it was up here when you were looking?
Yeah, because I specifically was looking for property that backed up against BLM land, and so my real estate agent was looking for that specifically for me, and dog out.
Got dogs hanging around us right now.
These huge puppies, giant livestock guardian
and
dogs.
You mentioned we're in Southern Oregon, right?
Yeah, we're Southern Oregon, Southern Central Oregon. We're like just east of the I-5, and we're backed up against this BLM, but then like just 5 miles further inland from us is the Umpqua National Forest, and that of course connects to many other national forests. Your panting is obnoxious. Come on. I know. And so, dog training while podcasting. Here we go, folks.
Dogs that are used to getting up on your lap.
Yeah.
So you walked up here, what time of year was it?
It was April.
So you got to see like...
Yeah, I got to see flowers up here while we were in escrow. Actually, in April when I got here, it just looked like a green meadow, and I thought, oh, what a beautiful marshy meadow, you know. And I still didn't know very much about plants back then. That was 13 years ago, when I was 20. So, and long before I started the Sharpening Stone Earthskills Gathering and many of the other endeavors I'm involved in now. And all I knew is that I wanted to teach people about earth skills, you know, what some people call primitive skills or ancestral skills, but just, you know, like these ancient ways of being with the earth. And that really took me as a teenager. I discovered this way, and I realized that there's really just two ways that human beings have lived on the earth. One way is through direct relationship with nature and allowing nature to provide shelter, water, fire, food. And the other way is through industrial agriculture and money, which is our current paradigm. And I was pretty unhappy in the current paradigm, and so as a teenager I was seeking other options, and somebody handed me a Tom Brown Jr. book as a 14-year-old, and I kind of was like, whoa, like that's right, you know, like there's other ways to walk on the earth and other ways to exist, and that got me really inspired. And so when I was 18, I went to Tom Brown Jr. school and really just got a fire lit inside me to be passionate and get a lot of dirt time with these skills and be able to spread them around and teach people. So when I got the opportunity to buy land, that was what I wanted. I wanted to back up against BLM and have a space where I could like sharpen my edge, you know, and get better at these skills, and then also teach them. And so that's how we ended up here.
And so when you went to look for when you were checking out this land, I mean, you probably checked out a lot of pieces of land, but you had no clue what was actually here that was like culturally significant or ecologically significant until later.
Totally. Yeah. I mean,
not just this meadow, but your whole property and the region is just being here for a week and seeing the diversity here has been really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea what I was looking at. I recognized just a few plants, you know, I recognized some trees, but I was in that phase of like discovering about the plants where it just looked like this ocean of green, and like, you know, when your eye is not trained, you look out and many different plants kind of look similar, and you really can't tell the difference, you know, if you're not used to looking at plants and seeing the small differences and knowing what you're looking at, then it can all just kind of blur together and look like just like this mass of green. And that's kind of what I saw up in this meadow at first. It looked like a grassy meadow. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea until I really started studying and got to get out here with some plant people that I was actually looking at a field of food, you know, that I believe was probably tended by people who came before us here.
But I would say probably on the plant walks, Simon was like, no, most definitely tended. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like one of those things that I've talked about on the podcast too with other people, is like, how do you read like the archaeology of living plant communities? Like it is like its own thing that we often overlook, or, you know, that plants exist almost at the museum of the past too, the way that they exist in a place. And like, this is a very obvious wild garden. Other communities of plants are less obvious, mm-hmm. you know, or like you look and you see a bunch of Mariposa lilies, you could be like, well, I don't know, it could be, it might not be, but the Camas yampa that's here, it's yeah.
The combo there, and then a little bit further down is it's like a sea of fawn lilies just below us into the woods a little bit.
And the Osha too.
Yeah, and it's just like a hillside of food, and seeing that, yeah, and I definitely strongly feel like people were tending this, and maybe someday I can reach out to and discover more about the history of what the native people did here, which, we were on Cow Creek band of the Umpqua tribe land here where they would move and I don't know how much time they spent like living here, but they definitely moved through this zone. So I assume that they were also tending and harvesting as they went. But I'd love to learn more about the history from them too at some point. And yeah.
Yeah, James, this person that was teaching some plant walks this week, was pretty informative about like how different even little tucked in places were family gardening, tending spots, and even in Camas meadows like this, like you could tell whose was whose. Like if people would move the death camas to the outside of the camas, and like it designated a family or like a group of related peoples, like their little zone that they would be responsible for. Not that they like owned it like private land necessarily, but they would be responsible for. And so many of those folks have been pushed out of this region altogether, and they can't come back and tend the places they have always been able to tend. So I mean, in some regions that's not always the case, and a lot of places it is, that no one knows to even come up here anymore, maybe, or there's a story of this place somewhere that someone knows, but they don't know where it is. And
yeah, and now that you're saying that, like about the death camas being pushed out to the edges, look at that far side of
there's a lot more of it.
There's a lot more on the outside. Like I've never noticed that before. But like we just walked through what was almost completely blue camas.
There's a little bit of death camas starting to flower in the middle. But
there's a few here and there, but like definitely like on the edges, that's a lot.
Huh. That's interesting.
I never really noticed. I never noticed that before. Oh. But yeah, it's really really tragic history to this land, and continues to be tragedy here. With the way that corporations are treating the earth, and the way that our land use system has monetized the natural resources here, specifically logging. I mean, since I've lived here in the last 13 years, the properties bordering my property on two sides were clear cut, and then aerial sprayed after they replanted, and the destruction was intense. I mean, I moved here when I was 20 years old, and then when I was like 23, they clear cut the whole driveway, and that used to be huge old trees.
Yeah, now you walk out there and it's like full sun, like view for miles.
Totally.
Yeah.
And, I mean, and then I actually petitioned, or no, maybe petitioned isn't the right word. I reached out to the logging companies who were doing that, and I asked them not to spray herbicide on the land bordering my land here, because it was so close to me and my buildings and like where I live. And they of course were like, yeah, right, we're going to spray, but the question is like, are we going to do it with a helicopter, or should we just do it with people wearing backpack sprayers? And I even, like, when the first year I was starting Sharpening Stone, I was also like trying to start a company where I was doing the same thing that they do with the herbicide, but with goats. And basically what they do, for those of you who don't know this, the logging companies out here, they clear cut, and then they come back and they plant GMO Roundup ready fir trees.
And this is whether it's private logging land. We were talking about this right before we started recording, and I was like, really? Like, some of this stuff, I mean, the politics of logging in Oregon, or like the way it all works, is really crazy. But like, so they do the same type of thing, whether it's public land being leased to logging companies or whether it's owned by logging companies. It's generally similar, but then there's a little bit different thing that happens if it's just privately owned fully or...
Yeah, I mean, it's all, the details aren't totally clear to me, but like if the logging companies own the land privately, then the land is owned by these giant corporations, and they do like really destructive stuff. And then if it's like BLM who's leasing out and letting people cut on the BLM, then BLM doesn't do aerial spraying, from what I know. And there's some gray zones in between, but like mostly if it's private land, they clear cut it, they plant GMO trees, and then they spray for like 3 years, twice a year. A mixture of like atrazine during the spring. I believe it's atrazine in the spring and Roundup in the fall, or maybe it's the other way around, but they spray 2 different chemicals from a helicopter.
Atrazine?
And they're like hundreds of thousands of gallons, right? And like the whole valley fills with the smell of these chemicals. And we just have to leave during that time. And they're hundreds of feet up, so they're not supposed to spray in the creeks or the springs, but like the wind is blowing and like they're spraying hundreds of gallons and it's just drifting all over the place, and you can see it hit the springs. And so like the law says, you can't spray within 50 yards of the springs or the surface water. And so they look at their little GPS or whatever when they're flying, and they're like, oh, we'll stop spraying right here, but they're like 400, 500 feet in the air. So like, yeah, maybe they stop spraying right next to the creek, but then like it drifts all over the place.
And they're doing that so that they can favor those GMO Douglas fir trees that they're planting, which grow really fast, right? And like are easy to like push through commerce. And then they are wanting to kill the diversity of other plants that would be coming up, whether it's like big trees, like you were saying, madrones, or like shrubby chaparral type plants, or whatever it is, huckleberries. They don't want any of that, right? They just want the one tree.
Totally. I mean, they're what they told me is they're actually not even trying to kill all those plants. They're trying to just set them back so that the GMO, the Roundup Ready fir trees, can get spring up and get outside of the above the zone where those more broadleaf and herbaceous plants are growing. And so if they can like stunt them and set them back, then it gives the other trees a chance to get ahead, and then they can have their super thick fir forests.
And then you think about fire in relationship.
Yeah, I mean they're creating a terrible fire danger situation because they like their forests super thick, so that the
They
trees.
make more money.
Yeah, well, and not only are there more trees per acre, but the trees also are so close together that they break each other's branches off as they grow. And so if you look around, you'll see these thicker parts of the forest. There's like a bunch of these fir trees that are they're like 30, 40 years old. And they're like super, super tall, but there's like no branches on the whole thing, which means no knots in the lumber. And so because when the wind blows, they rub against each other and all the branches get broken off as they grow. And so they're these like truffula trees. They have like these like tufts at the top of greenery, and the whole rest of the tree is barren all the way down. They're super spindly, super unhealthy, terrible fire danger. And then if they're just left like this, like they'll die on their own, because there's just not enough like light or resources for the trees to grow healthily when they're that like thickly packed in. And then like the snow will fall and the snow will land on the tuft on the top, and they'll bend over and just break. So if you walk around after the snow, there's just like tons of these little spindly trees that fall over. But that's what makes the best lumber gardens, monocrops. It's interesting. People come up, they're like, "Oh, you live in the wilderness." I'm like, "No, I live in a monocrop. I live in a giant monocrop, like tended land that's tended for monocrop GMO trees, and it's pretty terrible. But ecologically, it's terrible, And then if you got thick forests too, it's like elk have a hard time walking through such thick forests, Deer have a hard time walking through such thick forests, and there's not much to eat. Like fir trees, they produce some food for some animals, like in their fir cones, but mostly like little pine squirrels and other little like rodents and stuff. Like they're not providing food for any of the larger fauna that's out here. So you get these like populations of deer that are super scrawny and who are kind of struggling. And it's also interesting because they flock to the recently clear-cut areas because that's where all the forage grows. So you got deer and elk who are like hanging out in these clear cuts that are then sprayed. And so like we got roundup deer.
And you're like hunting maybe, or something, and then you have to consider that. Like,
yeah.
How good is this deer to eat?
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, I've just like submitted to like the fact that living here, I'm going to be ingesting a certain amount of like industrial Roundup, which is heartbreaking. Just because of like it's such the opposite thing I want to be doing with myself and my body. Like being exposed to these things is like part of the reason I moved up here is because I thought it was more free. It's more like
getting out of the city or out of like more populated areas and
yeah.
come into this.
I never would have thought that I'd be like exposed to so much of that stuff. It's like being in farmland. It's like being in industrial farmland. But at the same time, you look around and we can get super doom and gloom with it. But then like you look up here and it's like wow, like so much diversity. And so much beauty in the understory still persists, despite like all this, like terrible practices. And
I mean, even in some of the clear cuts, I've wandered here and there around and be surprised by what's coming up. I went up where you said they cut right at your driveway yesterday, and just there's so many Mariposa lilies right there, and not as many over here. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, and tons of bare grass flowering. And I mean, of course, there's a resilience beyond what we can do to a point. I mean, there is a breaking point where then that resilience isn't there anymore, like when you completely cut like chop a whole mountain down or something like that with like say mountaintop removal. Or I mean, they're all the kind of destructive things we're doing. Maybe there's moments where we're like, wow, yeah, there's so many Mariposa lilies, but how many years can we keep doing it before, like, I mean, I say nature when we, I don't want to say nature pops back, but like we are nature too, so that's like that whole conversation. But, what we're doing to the land is also interestingly anthropogenic, but doesn't feel like the right thing to be doing on such a large scale. Like, I mean, imagine if we used all that same equipment to do something that benefited the diversity of place or all of life, how much we could actually affect, but yeah, I mean, how much can the land really take of that over time,
Yeah, and I mean, because the forest out here is so thick, and it's so thick because we've been monocropping it, right? But because it's so thick, like it does need to be cut. So it's an interesting juxtaposition, like to find myself in with the logging companies, because when they do clear cut, like I said, the deer flock to those places, and you see these a new like refreshing of plants that like disturbances and animals who need open space, but it's kind of the job that the fire would naturally do.
Or like other tending practices, the fires or like thinning in certain ways or like cutting in certain ways that would keep a lot of spaces in the forest open for like the bear grass and for more fawn lilies or whatever it is that wants to come up in those spaces, right?
Totally. So like in some ways, like the clear cuts are like another, it's like resetting the forest to start again, and it's part of a healthy cycle kind of. But then the problem is that they're bringing in Roundup Ready trees, and they're planting too close together, and then they're spraying it with all these chemicals. So it's like, it'd be one thing if they came in and clear cut and then left it for alone,
For another
or
100 years.
exactly.
Okay.
But instead they've got some contract with these big chemical companies, and they think that it's better. And what boggles my mind too is like, I go into these clear cut, I live here and I walk these lands all the time. And so I'll go over there 2 weeks after they spray Roundup, and I'll walk through the clear cuts where they just sprayed, and it's like, I can't even really tell that they've done much except poison things unnecessarily. Like, it doesn't even seem like they're setting the plants back that well, or like it's not even doing its job that well from what I can tell. Like, I walk around and it's like the blackcap raspberries, which is one of the big things they're going after, like they don't seem that set back by it. So it's like, it seems like it's kind of spinning their wheels.
What's the point?
Yeah, it's like they just bought the propaganda from the chemical companies that it's going to help, but it doesn't really seem to be helping. It's just, they're just like poisoning things unnecessarily. And
Wheel spinning makes money,
exactly.
And even just creating fire hazard makes money, because the fire is like a money maker too.
Right.
At this point,
Yeah, it's such a rabbit hole of just like backwards thinking, of like profit centered thinking instead of ecological centered thinking. And
I mean, I was here this week. I've never been to the Sharpening Stone Gathering, but people keep telling me it's their favorite gathering.
Nice.
Because it's small and like intimate and like feels family oriented, and just like everyone knows everyone, and it's great, but
glad that's the word on the street. That's
anyway,
sweet.
well, at least a handful of people have told me it's their favorite gathering. But
Awesome.
I was here and I contacted y'all to see if I could attend too, because I was being like, people were telling me you should go to do some plant walks, and you were like, sure, not knowing me at all really, and so I had no idea what was here. I spent enough time in this region that I felt confident I'd be able to like lead some of the walks that I was doing, like in the wild tending and critical ethnobotany realms. And a lot of the conversation that we had this week with students and like people here interested in the plants is just that like layer of capitalism and how it affects how we see what a healthy ecosystem is, and like all the like pieces that come with that, and how it feels frustrating to know how to be a good land steward or to tend land when you have to consider that at every moment.
Talk out.
Dog.
Go on, pup.
He's sniffing the actual mic.
Figuring out what that is. What is it? You're going to be on a podcast. Your famous dog. A famous puppy.
Wait, which one is this?
This is Moon.
Moon.
And the other one's Star. My
Star.
kids named him. Moon's all white, and Stars is all mostly black with some white poking through. But yeah. I'm glad that's what people say about Sharpening Stone. It's my favorite. It's my favorite gathering too. And yeah, we're really happy to have you out. And I'm a plant geek.
Oh no.
Myself.
Go on.
And I feel like plants are one of the keys to like really being really like knowing a place as home. Like once you know the plants, then there's like a safety net. It's like being able to hunt is great, and being able to trap is great, and being able to like, but once you can identify your plant foods that are around you, then you're really home, and you can settle into feeling that comfort of having those familiar faces around you. And so really cool to have you at the gathering this
fun.
year. Yeah, and you taught like 60 students?
Yeah, I tried to keep an idea in my head of how many it was every day. And a lot of people, we didn't have a lot of plant walks happening during the week, but yeah, there was a lot of people. One day I had like 30-something people wanting to
Wow.
walk. I was like, okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
Yeah, well, out of 150, that's a pretty good
Yeah.
chunk.
at least third of people here, if not more.
Yeah,
But yeah.
that's awesome. Yeah, so Sharpening Stone, this was our 8th gathering, and our 9th year doing it. But of course, we lost a year due to the pandemic.
And it's a gathering that it's not just like a festival, any old festival. It's like an ancestral skills gathering or like a Skillshare style gathering, right? I've featured a couple episodes on the podcast where we're talking about ancestral skills gatherings, or I'm airing the episode from a skills gathering, and we've had a lot of discussions about like lots of the dynamics of the gatherings and pros and cons and these kinds of things. Like, so yeah, Sharpening Stone is basically in that vein, right?
Yeah, we're no drugs or alcohol gathering, so people aren't here to party; they're here to learn. And I bring in, I've been in the skills community for a long time, since I was a teenager, and so it's basically an excuse to invite all my friends and people who I think are cool, all to come together and spend a week together and sharing our skills. And most skills people want to teach what they've spent all this time learning, and so it's a great opportunity for people who are interested but don't know much to come and experience and learn these different skills. Like this year, for example, we had bow making, and we had 2 different types of hide tanning, and we had your plant walks. We had a couple other plant people, and we had some cattail weaving and coal burning spoons and
fire making classes.
Yeah, fire by friction, a couple different varieties of fire by friction. We had a cool kids program this year where the kids got to dip their toes into a lot of these different skills.
A lot of kids.
Yeah, it was a big kids year, and I think we're getting a reputation for being really like good, safe place for families to bring kids and introduce them to these things. We had wool felting and a good number of classes this year. Broom making. I was somebody who was actually teaching how to make brooms out of the bear grass,
cool.
which is here, and I think they maybe even harvested some. But yeah, so it's just it's kind of a launching pad for a lot of people. They like get interested, they start going to skills gatherings, and then they get connected in with the community, and can like really like dive deep. So it's a beautiful thing, and I've lost count of the number of people who tell me that their lives are changed since they came to a Sharpening Stone gathering or one of the skills gatherings. I really support all the ancestral skills gatherings that I know of, that I've been to, and I think it's doing a lot of good in the world for people to reconnect to these skills and remember what it is to be a human being that connects with the earth, who has a relationship with these things surrounding us. Dog out. Go on.
You're like, okay, you told me to rest for a minute, and now I'm going to get up again and try.
Yeah, so it's been really fulfilling work, and we start like in December. We start, networking instructors and figuring out our work trade situation and selling tickets and organizing it, and then I cook 2 meals a day.
Crazy that you organize it and you cook. You end up being the cook too.
Right. Yeah. This year was better than the last many years. I cooked all 3 meals a day.
Wow.
Before, and it was too much, but
and you butcher some animals ahead of time too for the gathering.
Right. Yeah, I really believe in like our source of food being quality and being connected. So for an ancestral skills gathering, like what better audience to like buy some animals from a local farm and butcher them myself, so that we're eating that really like local meat that we know where it comes from, and they're really just friends of mine who are raising animals I buy from. And I want it to feel really full circle like that. Like sometimes we do like rabbit processing, and as one of the skills. So people like kill and butcher a rabbit, and then they bring them to the kitchen, and then I cook rabbit for everybody for a meal. And it's just funny, the dogs are like totally attracted to what we're doing right now.
They're like, we want to be a part of it.
Yeah, usually they go lay off somewhere nearby, but they're like right up in our business. So yeah, it's fun. It's a lot of work, and but it's the good work. You know, I feel just so gratified. Every year, people are just so grateful to have been a part of Sharpening Stone, and throughout the years, I've taught private classes, mostly for kids, but sometimes for adults too. And I teach at other gatherings. I teach skills for other people's gatherings, and that's always nice to show up and not have as many responsibilities at a different gathering, you know. But yeah, and then this year we're actually going to start a second gathering because we sold out tickets so fast to Sharpening Stone this year that we decided that there's enough interest we can host a second gathering. So we're going to do one in the fall. And it's going to be called Feast on the Fire, and that'll be in October, the 7th through the 9th. This year, and it's going to be a little bit different than many of the skills gatherings, Sharpening Stone included. A little bit different concept, but a lot of the same sort of skill sets. And I think like we're in vogue now, like the skills gatherings.
Sounds like it.
You
I
know,
don't watch TV, but I keep hearing there's more and more, or like media in general. There's like a lot of focus on this subculture now every day, and like, you know, yeah, it's crazy.
Rewilding is a hot topic right now. And a couple years ago, and there's an author, Jessica Kraft, who came to Sharpening Stone to interview me for her book. It's all about rewilding. She's a well-published author, and so that'll be coming out in the next year or so. But it's just, you know, showing it's trending right now. I think people are really waking up, and it's been kind of like a slow increase every year to our ticket sales and people who are interested. And then this last year it really blew up. But you know, it's the year after the pandemic, or you know, a couple years after we've been in this. And I think people like went to the store and couldn't get toilet paper for a week, and we're like, maybe I should get some skills, you know, like learn some stuff, because it scared a lot of people, I think. So we've seen a big increase in interest since then, and I think the whole world has.
In that movement, reconnecting with land and all the ways that can look.
Yeah.
I feel like, I mean, I'm seeing there's a trend of people like wanting to be outside more. It seems like, at least from my spending time on public land and like traveling over the years, and like doing a lot of camping on public land, there's a lot more people out and about. But since I don't really watch a lot of TV, or like, I don't, or you know, the media out there about it, even YouTube, I don't know what's happening. I mean,
Totally.
I have Instagram, and I hang out on there sometimes too much, and then I don't for a while, and I'm like, I don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
But it makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, that's a big culture shift during this whole situation the past few years.
Definitely. I mean, I've been pretty disconnected to like what's going on in the greater world out there. Like we're off grid here, so we have like minimal kind of solar and micro hydroelectric power. So we have some electricity, but until very recently I had like really slow internet. So, you know, I didn't watch any.
No cell phone service really here either.
No, there's no cell phone service. And yeah, it's like I haven't like sat down and watched a movie in 10 years. You know? It's just not, like, I came up here to disconnect from all that and reconnect to the land. And so it's been really interesting, because recently I've started on this filmmaking endeavor. And so all of a sudden I'm and then I got high-speed internet, so I've been like
upload and download and
and like check in with the world a little more. So I've been more up to date recently than I have in the last 13 years.
And we all had a little sit-down viewing of some of your YouTube. Some of them you haven't aired yet publicly, but your film work with your YouTube channel yesterday was really cool. I was like, oh man, you know what? This is neat. Like, it's such a like, it doesn't have to be a bad thing to create. I mean, like, you can think like that's that world, but like actually it's a way to make art and communicate ideas.
Totally.
You know, the podcast is that too. It's like this modern technology that's a bridge between like what we consider Babylon and like earth-based life, and it's not that simple, right? And I think using these tools to create something that can communicate to people ideas is a really interesting work, you know.
Yeah, it is, and I see that this is you know, like, technology in and of itself isn't always a bad thing. Like, we can use technology to do bad things for the earth or for the ecosystem, and we can use it to try to help too, you know. So I use the example all the time of like thinning the forest. Like, we could go out and thin the forest with axes, but you know, if we bring a chainsaw, we're going to get 10 times as much done, and we're going to burn a cup and a half of gas, and spread some of the bar oil around or whatever, but we're going to open up the canopy quick, and like 2 people can really do a lot with a chainsaw, whereas 2 people with axes, it's going to be a lot slower. Even though an axe is a more earthy way to do things, it doesn't actually mean that it's necessarily like better, you know, and that utilizing these technologies that we have that we may not like appreciate the way that they're used a lot of the time, i.e. clear cutting, you know.
It's contextual. Like, we actually talked about this, Gabe and I, when we were on the Colorado Trail doing the wild tending project, the plan to go a couple summers ago, just like the cup-in digging stick that we carried with us, and we were using one this week, and when in the walks, my friend Cy Moon was here and like basically assisted me on those walks, and they brought a couple of their cup-ins, and it's like a titanium welded tool that's definitely not traditional in the sense of like, it's not like a mountain mahogany stick that's been fire hardened, it's not or a U digging stick, you know, it's like not traditional in that sense, but often it's, you know, we talk about like, well, is this a relevant tool to use to do this work? Isn't that interesting? We're using this fancy metal thing to dig these roots, or to disturb soil, but actually it's like we're living in a world where we have a lot more tending to do, so we need to be able to do it quicker, and we have a lot different soils sometimes in certain places that we need to be able to deal with, and so the titanium is like helpful. And so sometimes it's like, I love the slowness of slow craft. Some of the things that people are making here still take a long time because we're using tools that are simpler, but in other instances we're figuring out how to do the thing that our goal is, but we're adapting to the fact that no one's been tending this for a really long time, and we need that, it's urgent, you know, we got to tend, and so maybe we use a titanium digging stick, or maybe we use a chainsaw to thin for now.
Yeah, I mean, the benefits outweigh the negatives, you know, and in a lot of those instances, everybody drove in a car to get to Sharpening Stone, you know, and they drove here and they burned petroleum fuels that there's wars waged to get, and, you know, like, there's such destruction in the world for all that, but like, they came to reconnect, and hopefully they left here with a changed perspective or an enhanced perspective, you know, and ability to be better stewards of the earth. And so, like, if they can teach their kids that, and or spread that to one person each, you know, pretty soon we're making a big difference. And so I think any means to reach that end is kind of worth it to me, you know.
Seeds are planted in lots of different ways, you know.
Exactly, you know, yeah. So I'm not against using, you know, like, for like talking about getting a video drone to like make my videos better. It's like using a remote control drone to get aerial footage so that my videos will be more engaging, so people will watch them, so people will get inspired.
See the bigger picture of what's happening here in this valley with the clear cuts, like the lines between like who's tending what in what way, and how this ecology is so broken up into different ideologies in one valley.
Totally.
I think that in that way, getting the aerial view and incorporating it in is like a tool for like here's where, see what it looks like.
Yeah, and so I think it's all just to be looked at in the bigger picture, of like where are we trying to get to, and how do we get there. And yeah, I'm not against utilizing modern technology to do that, because it's where we're at and it's what we've got. And they're powerful tools. That's why they're so prolific. So. But
tell me a little bit about this YouTube endeavor. You're a beginner media type person, so this is like you've never done any kind of filming before, but now you're starting to do, or maybe you have. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I am a beginner in videography, but I did photography for many years. Photography in high school, I did like darkroom stuff. Before I got into skills when I was in high school, I was doing a lot of film, camera, picture stuff. So using a camera is not totally new to me, but video cameras are. So, some of you might know a person named Les Stroud, and also known as Survivor Man. He did a series. He was one of the first he was the first survival series that came out on a major network. So he got on Discovery Channel, and he was just the first person to record himself doing survival, all by himself. He'd go out and video record himself and do 5-day survival treks or 7-day survival treks, and record them and his experience, and then he pitched it to Discovery Channel. Like
he was just playing around with that, and then he was like, I feel like this is interesting. I'm going to see if these people will be into it. They didn't even find him or anything.
I think the story, I think he made a little documentary about living in the wilderness with his then wife. And then he did that. It's called Snowshoes in Solitude was his first film, and then that never got aired on a major network, but it won some awards for self-film documentary. And then through that he made connections and ended up making a couple of pilot episodes of Survivor Man and pitching it to, I guess, a producer. And I hope I'm getting the story right, Les, because I'm sure he's going to listen to this.
I mean, the details ultimately don't.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. But yeah,
he's awesome.
He Yeah.
And he lives nearby here.
Yeah. So, well, long story short, he ended up getting famous that way and kind of getting a lot of exposure, and a lot of people do know who he is. And I was actually inspired by him as a teenager.
So it's been around a while, the Survivor Man thing.
Yeah. He doesn't film new episodes of Survivor Man anymore. So it's all reruns at this point. He's doing other projects, which I got to be a part of some of those. But so yeah, he kind of led the charge in exposing people to survival and kind of popularized that a lot, which as a teenager, I was into this stuff and I was like, wow, cool. There's a future in this, big mainstream TV networks are interested in survival. So it seems like it's something that, can become a career for me. And then he came to a Sharpening Stone a few years ago. I guess it was 4 or 5 years ago now. And he interviewed me for one of his shows called Campfire Interviews, where he interviews interesting people. And we right away had a good connection. And then he called me up and asked if I knew of anybody who would be a good wild foods consultant for his most recent show, which airs on PBS, called Les Stroud's Wild Harvest. And so I said I'd be happy to show him some mushrooms and plants that are around here, and teach him what I know, because he's from Ontario, and so he's not totally familiar with all the ones the plants that are here
In this place.
on this place, but he wanted to film some episodes of his show here, so he hired me to help find interesting edible plants that he could showcase on his PBS show. And then I ended up appearing in one where we went and found matsutake mushrooms. He's very humble and very kind in real life, real stand-up guy, and so he and I really connected, and we spent a lot of time driving to the coast and stuff together to find these plants. And I ended up mentioning to him that I always thought it would be fun to like start a YouTube channel or like have my own show. And he looked at me and he said, "You should." And I said, "Well, here I am. I can make a bow and I can tell you about plants, but like, I don't have money for a video camera. It's expensive equipment. I don't know the first thing about video editing, and I wouldn't know where to start." And he said, "Well, I'll give you some cameras if you really want to do this. Like, I think you should, and I'll give you equipment and help you with the editing." And I was kind of blown away. I was just like, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." And so he gave me, I've been filming with the original Survivor Man video cameras that he filmed that series with, some of those seasons.
Yeah, we were looking at some of the film equipment yesterday. A lot of people who are doing YouTube are using like the fanciest camera equipment out there, but you're making it work with like the stuff that was fancy in the, I don't know how old that stuff is, but late 90s, early 2000s
Early
or
2000s,
something.
totally.
And making it work fine.
Yeah, I mean, and he even said, he was like, "You got a nice, camera on your cell phone. Like, it's better than a lot of cameras out, like older cameras out there." And I don't. I have like a really old phone. So I said, "Well, not really." He said, "Well, here, let me just give you some cameras." So he gave me some GoPros and a couple of really nice, what were once really nice cameras, and now are kind of older technology, but still HD video and working fine for me, And it's really, like he said the content is what's important, not the like camera that you take it with. Like, if you make compelling storylines and interesting topics, then people aren't going to care that much about, if it's 4K or HD. Like,
a lot of YouTube there's a lot of junk out there, and it's like the fanciest equipment, the best cinematography, but they're talking about nothing interesting,
Yeah.
You're like, well, if you're talking about something interesting, why does it have to be like perfectly filmed at every moment,
Exactly, and it's like really dry. So anyway, yeah, he very generously donated a bunch of his time and has taught me how to use the editing programs, which is such a funny thing to be doing, Like, I'm out here to do the skills, and then I go and sit in front of the computer, and I'm like,
that is.
like, yeah, the podcast, like
oh,
wading through the technology and just trying to figure it out well enough to make something interesting and compelling. And I'm an artist too, of like, I'm a musician, and I did the photography, so. There's a fun creative element to it that I do really enjoy, but the learning the like computer programs and stuff has been a major challenge for me. But I feel like it's getting easier with every episode. So I just published the first one, my first episode, which is my learning curve in filmmaking. I started with one camera, and then the second episode I had two cameras, and now I have like 3 or 4.
And so you're focusing on so wild tending, this concept that has a lot. I mean, we've been doing a wild tending series for the last couple years on the podcast, so there's a lot to talk about what that really means. But within your videos, I find really interesting is that you're like showcasing a way to tend and be reciprocal with the land, as well as like how to do a skill related to that, and how to eat some plants from the land or foods or animals from the land, all kind of in combination in the episode. And I just thought it was so cool, the two that I got to see, that it's not just like go out and forage and like now you're a wild man in the wilderness. It's like actually like there's more nuance to that, and I appreciate that that's like what you're weaving into it. Yeah.
Totally, yeah. For me, I mean, in the show, I'm for each episode, I try to harvest something that's abundant, that's being offered by the landscape, something that is available in abundance. I'm trying to plant something back for each thing, or propagate something, or tend something, caretake something in each episode, and make something in each episode. So, like, for instance, the first one, I harvested cattails, I planted cattails, I harvested a couple crayfish, and then I made a little meal with some greens and cattail and crayfish, and then I used the leftover like leaves of the cattail that I harvested to like make repairs on my woven cattail sun hat. And so I'm just showing like a day in the life of somebody who's doing all like everything they can, like who's having a deepening their relationship with the landscape. So that includes like these skills, and like if you're just harvesting food or medicine, then like what would happen to those cattail leaves, right? Like I just was harvesting the stalk for food. The leaves would end up in a compost or left on the ground somewhere. But in my life, I've learned how to weave with cattails, and so I'm not going to let those materials just go to waste. And so I wanted to show like that there's a use for every part, just like when we teach animal processing.
You use the pollen too.
Yeah, in the second episode, I end up harvesting the pollen of the cattail, and so I'm just trying to show like the roundedness of being an earth person, like more than just like one aspect or another aspect, just kind of paint the picture of like how many different ways we can interact with nature, and how it can benefit us and benefit the landscape at the same time. And like in the third episode, I built a wiki up in the winter, and so I like used an axe to cut down a bunch of little saplings, and then I peeled the bark, and then I saved the bark that I peeled, and in another episode I'm going to use that bark to bark tan a fur or
I like
a hide.
the connection between the episodes, like you can wear your cattail hat,
Exactly.
in the next episode.
Exactly.
So it's like, I remember you fixed that,
And so that's that ties into like the longevity of the show is eventually like I'm making my own clothes. I'm improving my gear and my situation, and I'm like building structures and like tending places. And then in season 2, like I'm gonna revisit all the places that I initially tended in season 1, and the places where I planted foods. I'm gonna revisit those areas where I tended native plants, and see how well my propagation techniques worked, and then do more, and maybe invite other people like yourself and other skills folks to come and join me and see like how much abundance we can create through propagation of wild foods, and like the kinds of gifts we can receive, the kinds of abundance that's around us that we can turn into food and other useful things,
It's like teaching how to make how to like incorporate the tending and the use of the plants, and like and making new culture out of it, because often it's like, how do you do that? I mean, like cattails, for example, people can find in so many places, even in urban areas sometimes, and like not knowing how to engage it is like because there's no culture around it. And so like I think sometimes through the art of these kinds of mediums we can like create new culture around those relationships, and someone's going to feel inspired and be like, that looks like a lot of fun, maybe I want to go play with the cattails.
Totally. And it's less of like an instructional video,
but it is in a sideways way, in a sense,
right?
Like it's not exactly like step by step how to make the hat and all the things, but it's like an inspiration to like look into it.
Yeah, I'm trying to give enough information to get people excited and inspired, and like give them the motivation to get out there and take a cattail weaving workshop, come to Sharpening Stone, or go and then look up one of the more dry instructional videos, that if you're excited about something, you're going to watch one of those all the way through. But it's hard to like be into it if you aren't already excited about it. So the idea behind my videos is to just like give this broader view of like how beautiful it can be, and how connected and full circle it can be, once you get a foundation of skills like propagation of plants and like weaving and, you know, these other like hard skills I do. And yeah, I'm wanting to just like inspire people to get out there, and Les has offered to put me on his YouTube channel to help me get exposure. Once I get enough episodes, like basically once I'm done with one season of the show, he's going to put me on his YouTube channel and then direct people to my channel, which by the way is called Becoming Wild, and Becoming Wild Adam Larue. We'll pull it up on YouTube.
We'll link it in the show notes. I saw that you added me on Instagram too this morning when I looked. I was like, you got an Instagram page too.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I saw that. I was like, who is that? Oh wait.
Becoming Wild. Yeah. So yeah, and it's kind of the story of my process of learning. So I'm gonna show my failures and my successes and the different methods I try to propagate with, and mostly I try to, you know, do my best job to prepare in advance so that I am successful. But you know, we're gonna go back to the plantings and stuff, and if there's failures, I'm gonna show that too. And
it's such a cool long-term thought too. Like if you did this for a couple years and seeing what things look like over time, and then you have it documented to share for people to use as a resource, you know, like what will the plantings look like, or like the tendings look like in time, because often you plant or tend something and you don't, you know, like for me, I'm pretty nomadic right now in my life, and it's like I don't always get to go back and look at every single spot, but you have this little universe right here with plenty to tend in this one place, and you can go back over and over and over and like document what you're doing and have kind of some a lot of control over. I think that's what's, even though privately and ownership is within this construct of colonialism and capitalism, and we're having to live within that paradigm of like this sort of lines drawn on ecology's piece. When you're a person that like has the mind to take care of land and wants to be intentional and wants to learn how to be a good steward, and then you can like share that and be here a guardian of this place, creating more living seed banks and things like that too. It's like it's an opportunity to be responsible in how you do that and share that, and so to me I think it's a cool idea. I mean, it's inspiring me. I'm like, maybe I should do some more videoing.
You should come on my show, and then
that'd be fun.
And then, you know, yeah, and like eventually, you know, if I can you know, continue this for years, which I hope to, and make a bunch of seasons of the show, I want to incorporate more and more of our friends and
collaborations.
Yeah, and just like, and be able to start at season 1 and then like look at season 10 and be like, you know, here we are 10 years later, and look at the perennial food forest that we have in this valley now. You know, that once, you know, we planted 2,500 camas seeds in this meadow here a couple years ago, and so, you know, in 5 years, like, I wonder how many more flowers we're going to see here.
Planted probably a few hundred this year too. Yeah, and
with
then
the
Mander's
classes.
planted some last year up the hill right there too.
Yep.
So it's been a few years of seed planting, and
so I want to document that and just show, like, if you're determined and if you have manpower, like, or woman power, as it will be as well, but
them power.
yeah, them power. How many, like, what you can do to a landscape, what a human hand who's bent on like caretaking and being a good steward of the land, like how much impact can that have on a landscape over years, you know, of work. So yeah, I'm really excited about the project, and really super grateful to Les for giving me the opportunity and helping me along. And I'm excited to bring in like Callie, you know, who was on Alone, and some of our other, like, you know, famous skills friends.
They were like our friends before they were famous.
Yeah.
Famous. And it's like, I'm like, wait, that's right, Bonilla, you're famous now.
Yeah, it's funny how like Alone is that way. You know, it's like you're on Alone, and then you go out and struggle through a survival situation for a few months, and then you're super famous now. And
well, those folks just so happen to be actually really cool in real life, so
definitely.
It's cool that they're influencing people,
Yeah, I'm super, like, I actually, just in the last few months since I got high-speed internet, I went back and watched Alone just to see our friends,
I haven't watched really any of them, so
yeah, it's really fun because, like, these people in person, and they're such sweet, amazing people, and then, like, now they have this platform with like thousands of viewers and thousands of people who are watching them on social media to share, and so they're excited. I've talked to so far, like, Callie and Monia, and about coming on my show too, and then, like, I'm gonna help them with some of their video projects. And
I had Monia on the podcast before she was on Alone, and it's crazy, like, yeah, if I'm like, maybe my podcast would have gotten a lot more listeners if I had done it after.
Yeah, do a before and after.
Yeah, I could do another one, with her. So what's your life like now?
Right, before and after Alone. The mountains, I'm gonna find a peaceful way to live. I'm moving to the mountains, don't wanna take no more than I can give. And that's why I'll fertilize the trees. More food for the squirrels and the deer, hey, that's more food for me. Want to lead my life more connectedly. Hey there, brother, won't you come with me? Hey there, sister, won't you walk with me? I'll move to the mountains, I'll build me a house of sticks, dirt, and debris. I'm moving to the mountains, don't pay no rent, cause Mama Earth, she don't charge me. And I'll drink my water from the spring, and eat what I've been offered, what each season brings, and give thanks for this fresh, sweet air I breathe. This is how it ought to be. 'Cause what I give comes tenfold back to me. I move to the mountains. I move to the mountains.
So do you have a bunch of ideas for the next, like, I don't know how many episodes you're going to do in the season, but, like, what plants you're going to engage? I mean, you've shared a little bit this week with me walking around the land, like, oh yeah, I want to do a tending project with this plant and, like, potentially over here in this zone, and, like, what do you think? It's been fun hearing a little bit of your ideas, but do you kind of have it planned out, or are you kind of winging it as the season goes?
Yeah, well, like, this is like, this is what I want to do for fun, it's like, when I have a couple days and I can just take time to go into nature, I can just go out and I walk the landscape and I ask myself the question, like, what is this landscape telling me? What is it offering me? What's abundant here? What's in season right now? Like, what kind of cool, like, projects do I want to get into? And so I have these, like, vague ideas where I'm like, ooh, like, like the Camas meadows, like, that's like this idea that's brewing. But part of the reason I was just so excited to get out on the land with you or any other plant nerd is, like, oh yeah,
because this is.
Yes. Come here. Good girl. Yeah, so I have some ideas, but I don't really totally know what I'm gonna do until like the day before. So I get out there and I have thoughts, and then I will go walk around, and I notice like, oh, like there's this or that is in season, and oh, I like, yeah, maybe I should do one with this, or, and like my hat just happened to need repair, and so that inspired me to use cattails in the stage they were in, so that I could do the repairs on the hat, and so yeah, I have a lot of different ideas, but I was so excited to get out on the landscape with you because there's still things I don't know. There's still plenty I don't know, and so walking around with you and being introduced to chocolate lily, which is pretty rare out here, but I haven't seen that many of them, but now I know what it looks like, and so
And what way to tend it.
And a way to tend it. So now there's ideas brewing there where I can, like, I'm not going to probably harvest some on the show for food, but I'll harvest and replant them, just to like do the caretaking aspect of it, and then maybe in like 3 seasons or 4 seasons or however many, there'll be enough of a patch that I can harvest some for part of a meal.
Definitely like tended probably 4 or 5 different little spots here this week of them.
Yeah.
Too. So I'm like, maybe we should have marked them all for you so you can see them next year. But
yeah. Yeah, well, and just earlier in the spring, just before things got really crazy for Sharpening Stone, Tom Brown III was here doing a survival trek with his students, and I did a plant walk with them. And then I got all inspired, and even though I was really busy getting ready for Sharpening Stone, I decided to take a day, and I filmed an episode where I harvested a bunch of fawn lilies and planted back the cormlets from the corms of the fawn lily, and propagated a space, and then I made like rock rings around them, so I'll be able to check back on them. And I did that, and I made a nice little plate of food with processed acorns and fawn lily corms, and miner's lettuce salad with dead nettle and some other greens, and ate a nice little meal and filmed an episode like that. And so yeah, it's partially on the cuff, and then like every time I go on the landscape, I'm like thinking and kind of like planting seeds in my inspirational mind of like ideas I have for the future. So so yeah, but I'm pretty open, and I'm cautiously proceeding because I don't want to I want to like come from an educated place about the things I'm doing, because I definitely don't want to be inspiring people accidentally to do something that might be harmful or might not actually be successful or whatever.
like foraging, the trendiness of foraging without like giving context for the ecological, the need for tending work. I mean, even if you did one on Camas, I'm sitting in the Camas meadow, there's so much to say about responsible tending and like cultural history and all these things that seems like, I think doesn't happen probably enough in the whole trending wild foods survivor world with all the skills or like relationships with plants and land. And I think it's a good thing for sure to be mindful of that.
And that's a big part of why I wanted to do this is because there are a lot of shows out there about survival and about wild tending, and you got a lot of herbalists around who they learned about the herbs and they want to go out and wild tend them so they can have their apothecary and stuff, but they don't know anything about what those plants need to be healthy and what the ecosystem needs. And so you get people who are unintentionally like over harvesting areas and leaving things damaged when their intentions are good, but they're just not really thinking in that reciprocal mindset. Instead they're thinking of like, what can I take to like help my rootsy herbalist business grow or whatever. And so the idea is to try to just inspire people to like give back and find a way to be reciprocal with their actions and to be mindful too. It's like even if you don't know how to give back or whatever, like you can selectively harvest and be careful with the way you're doing things, so that you're thinking about the future, with you're harvesting with your mind set on like how is this going to be in 10 years, and so that's really what inspired me to start doing this. And I talk to Les about this stuff all the time too, and he actually incorporated some wild tending stuff in his show.
Did he do that? He didn't do that necessarily as much before, but he's thinking about it more now. And he has such a big platform. It feels like that's cool. Yeah. Good influence right there.
Really awesome to be able to share some of that with him, and he's into it.
It's kind of an eye opener. You're like, wait, yeah, cool. Like, of course, this makes so much sense. Like, even if you weren't thinking about it before, it just like feels right.
Totally. And with his, the way he loves nature so much, so he was really excited that I had some of that stuff to offer. And we're in I appeared in episode 7 of season 1 of Les Stroud's Wild Harvest, which aired on PBS like a couple years ago, but it's on YouTube now, and so you can go see that. And we talked about ways you can give back to the mushrooms. And even though we were using matsutake mushrooms, which are really like classically difficult to propagate, it's like it certainly doesn't hurt to try. And he did try, and he planted some of the mycelium back that we had harvested, the bases, the stapes of the mushrooms themselves into the ground, with the hopes that they would propagate and stuff. And I made spore slurries too with the same matsutakes, and anyway, it's a cool project to be a part of, and I have a whole lot of appreciation for Les and for the opportunity. And you should check it out and look up Becoming Wild. Check out Becoming Wild on YouTube. And you might have to type in Becoming Wild Adam Larue, because I didn't realize this when I made the name, but there's like a YouTube channel called Becoming Wild that's like Minnesota Wildcats. It's like a hockey team or something.
So when you look it up, you end up looking at hockey videos.
Stuff. But if enough of us look up Becoming Wild Adam Larue, eventually I'll get to the top of the list there.
Well, yeah, we'll link it in the show notes. I tend to try to be really good about linking all the things related to the conversation in the show notes.
Cool.
About every episode, so people don't have to look too far to find a way to look at deeper. So
nice.
Before we wrap this up, the story of how you landed here, even though maybe this is something we should have like talked about in the beginning of the episode, but you've told it a few times this week, and around the fire we're all like hanging out, and like, how did you end up here? I mean, you were 20 years old when you got this place, and not many people who are 20 years old end up buying land, much less know where they want to live or what they want to be doing with their life. But you obviously got into skills at a young age and wanting to live close with the land at a young age, and then somehow by 20 years old you're like on land. So
the way I ended up getting this place and living here was that I was involved in a motorcycle accident when I was 18, and I was riding a dual sport motorcycle around, and somebody turned left in front of me in a classic motorcycle accident, and I ran into them and broke my leg in the accident, tibia, fibia, my lower part of my leg, on her wheel well. And luckily I didn't break any other parts of my body. It was a pretty low speed accident, but it was totally her fault. She just didn't see me, as is often the case with motorcycles and cars. And then I got awarded like $100,000 for the insurance settlement. And I was 19. I was 18 when I got in the wreck. I turned 19 in the hospital. I had like a couple surgeries. I have a steel rod in my leg from it. But then by the time I was 20, her insurance company gave me $100,000. And like you said, I was already into survival skills and like starting to explore this stuff and starting to practice these various different survival skills. And so I thought, I woke up in the hospital after one of the surgeries, and my friends were there like visiting me in the hospital, and so I woke up and just looked at them. I said, hey, I think we could get land with this money that's going to come to me. And that's what happened, and it all kind of fell into place perfectly. It's like, yeah, I broke my leg, and that's not that much fun, but then it allowed for me to get this property. So now I can refer to it as my lucky break. And yeah, I got $100,000, and then it happened to be perfectly during the 2008 mortgage crisis. So this property had been repossessed by the previous owners. So the bank then owned it, and then that bank went under in the mortgage crisis, and so they sold it to me for the amount of money that was owed on the property still.
So it would have been a lot more.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years earlier, it had sold for $450,000, and
you got it for like 98 or something.
Yeah, 92,000 is what I paid. And it was pretty perfect because that's exactly the amount of money I had. And so I had to pull the $50 out of my wallet and deposit it into the bank to have enough money to buy it flat out. And when the payment went through, I had exactly the right amount of money, and I had $14 left to my name. So there I was, 20 years old. I had $14 left. But I had this 30-acre property and a couple buildings here, and so I moved up from Northern California, where I grew up, and I've just been here since. Hardly left. I poured my whole being into living here and creating Sharpening Stone, and teaching kids and adults and networking and furthering the vision of nature connection. So that was the idea from the beginning, and yeah, I feel extremely fortunate that I got that lucky break. and yeah, here I am, and yeah, I'm super, super grateful that happened the way it did. And before that happened, I really didn't I was feeling pretty hopeless about the world in general, and the direction that we're going as a race and as a species. We're destroying the earth at a rapid rate, and I was just a cog in the wheel, and being forced to work a job I didn't like to pay rent.
You were doing tires or something.
Yeah, I worked at a Big O Tires when I was 18. And I had been, to Tom Brown Jr.'s tracker school, so I was inspired to work skills, and was kind of doing that, when I could, but I was so busy working to pay rent that I barely ever got to work skills in those times, and it felt very hopeless. How am I ever going to manifest the vision that I have for my life? And then this motorcycle accident was that gift. It was that ticket. So that's how it all came to be. And then I lived here 6 years before I started Sharpening Stone. And
it sounded like it was also hard for you to, as another whole story we don't have to go fully into, but you said that even though there's buildings here, that none of them were legal enough to be supposedly residences, and
yeah,
just this whole thing that's so ridiculous when you want to live simple, living to cut with codes and all this.
Yeah, I mean, it's really so crazy that the way that it works out here, the zoning of this property is called forest resource zoning, and the zoning says that if you have less than 160 acres, you can't have a home on that property, and part of the reason that they have the zoning is so that people don't come out here into these big lots of forest land and build a bunch of houses and create a suburbia out here, but what it ends up creating is a space where it's I could own this land, but I couldn't even live here. They told me I couldn't have houses here, and that I couldn't even I was well, what about a primitive mandan, when we were in court and stuff. I was going to all these hearings with the county because the houses weren't permitted here, and they said, well, you can't even live there for more than like, a few weeks at a time. Like you're not allowed to have a permanent residence there. And so like forest resource property is, it's you're allowed to like rape and pillage the land. Like it's there for clear cutting, it's there for gold mining, it's there for, you can dump herbicide on it, you can poison the land, but you can't live there. And so that just seemed really crazy to me, and I went back and forth with the county for like 3 years, until finally they found a loophole and allowed me to be here. But that was a big process, and then the next 3 years I spent like trying to figure out what to do here, to like create a business where I could
land taxes and the
yeah,
things you have to do,
totally. It's like I may own this land outright, but I still have to pay property taxes every year, and so then I still need money for. I mean, I'm a skills person, but I definitely live mostly off of food I buy from the store, just like anybody else, and the industrial agriculture complex, like it's still what supports me a lot. I grow a lot of food in my garden, so during the summer we eat a lot of that food, and I forage some food and I hunt and stuff too, but raise animals, but like I'm still like in the system, and so I still like have to find a way to make money, and so yeah, that's the position that I was in, and for a few years I didn't really know how it was going to manifest, and then I went to another skills gathering called Saskatoon Circle up in Washington. It's another great skills gathering. And
a couple interviews from Saskatoon.
Oh yeah,
Katie,
nice.
Katie,
Oh, Katie, yeah. Wilder babe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I went there, and that really inspired me. I was like, wow, it's like you just like network a bunch of instructors, it's like I don't have to teach every class. I can actually like get people who are really good at teaching these classes together, and host a gathering, and like have a lot of exposure, and like get a lot of people to come all at once and learn these skills for a week, and just be the organizer. And so when I saw that was possible, like it was like a couple years after I went to my first Saskatoon Circle, I started Sharpening Stone. And Cameron Green is the woman who actually started Saskatoon Circle, and who, when I mentioned to her I wanted to start a skills gathering, she was incredibly supportive, and like gave me her waiver, and like encouraged me, and gave me a bunch of contacts for different instructors that she used. And I think that's a really like beautiful way to be with each other. Like I don't see these other skills gatherings as competitors, like I see them as like allies, and I want to support them in any way I can. So I've myself now like paid it forward, and helped other people trying to start their own thing, and been very giving, just like Cameron was to me. So we're all friends, and we all support each other. And at Winter Count, which is another big skills gathering in Arizona, we were both there this February, and there was a little like gathering organizer meeting where a bunch of us gathering organizers sat down and talked about like how we can help each other, and what we do at our gatherings, and like what's really successful and what's not, and that like having that like colonized mindset, of like capitalistic mindset rather, of like, well, you're also doing the same business, therefore you're a competitor, and therefore like I should try to like hurt your business so my business does better. Like that doesn't exist in the skills community. From with the other organizers, we were all pretty on the same page of like, let's help each other out, because we're creating a good thing here, and it's just growing, and people are realizing this is something they should do with their lives, and so it's I really appreciate that about our skills community. And it's a pretty tight-knit group, and like I think we all want to help each other succeed. We all want to see these things become prolific, and see people returning to these earthways and becoming healthier people because of it. And our future relies on it, you know. I look around and I see this potential for human beings to live in reciprocity with nature, and I really believe in a future where people can walk gently on the earth and in a reciprocal way, and that if everybody did that and everybody was planting these wild foods, I mean, just imagine if every single person took one day of their weekend, even once a month, one day of their weekend, and went and planted like wild foods. Like, how different would the landscape be, and how quickly we could change the landscape into a living food forest of perennial wild foods, and like how much abundance that would create. You know, it's like if everybody could do one thing, you know, every weekend for the wild foods outside, like how long would it take before we had more food than we knew what to do with?
Yeah.
I see a lot of potential.
There's a lot of space to work from, like what we could say there's the bottom up and the top down too, right? There's lots of people trying to figure out the top down piece. Like, some things have to be fought in like courts in the legal realm in order to trickle down and make effects, or like have to be big actions. And some things actually like are more powerful when they work from the bottom up. And so whatever we can do to get at whatever space that we have the capacity to hold in that, you know, like obviously organizing a gathering in a way is a bigger piece to hold, and then like the planting the seeds of the camas or the fawn lilies or, you know, whatever, are like working from the bottom up too, you know. And yeah, everybody's in a different position to do what they can with where they come from. Well, it looks like it's starting to rain on my recorder.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good sign that we should probably stop now. We could keep talking.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being on the podcast. I'm glad you wanted to do it, like, and do any interviews this week, and haven't really done any in a little bit. And it felt exciting. I stayed here a couple extra days, and just to come up here and sit in the Camas meadow is a treat. So yeah, thanks for sitting down and chatting with me about your projects.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the podcast, and I really enjoyed walking with you and learning from you, and I'm really excited to do some more.
Cool. All right, let's go get out of the rain.
You just listened to a conversation with Adam Larue of the Sharpening Stone Earthskills Gathering out of Grants Pass, Oregon. I am the main host and editor of this podcast, and I edited this one myself. And the theme music for this episode and most episodes of the Ground Shots podcast is Sweat and Splinters by Mother Marrow. You can find links to Adam's projects in the show notes of this episode, and you can also find links to ways to support the Ground Shots podcast in the show notes of this episode and every podcast episode. All right, y'all, thanks for listening. Until next time.
Logs of locust cedar splits, I offer sweat and splinters. Forest elders breathe their last, I'll bring them for your supper. Every piece of wood I bring carries a story in lichen, fungus, beetles, maze. It's the same to you, all ablaze. When you burn, burn with the light of the morning's birth. Burn, burn with the heat at the heart of the earth. Burn, burn with the light that reveals our faces. Burn, burn with the heat that will warm these places. Some may fear your endless greed, but not me. No, not me. Some may fear your appetite, but I'm at home in your life. the tender light and thin, the chill of winter's creeping in. I'm stacking sticks on bended knees so you will keep me company. I'll bring you branches, feed you logs, so soon this wood will all be gone. I'll build you a lovely home, I'll leave you lots of breathing room. Logs of locust, cedar